Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Mark My Words, where today I have a very special guest on the show. He is a wildland firefighter. He is the creator of Mountain Mind Tricks, and he is also an author of two books. It is Thomas Wurm, and that is spelled Wurm, in case anybody confuses that with other variations. I just wanted to make that clear. And welcome to the show, Thomas. How you doing today?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I'm just ecstatic to be here and to tell my story a little bit and hopefully inspire people and give them something to think about for sure.
I'm already really inspired by your story. I've been obviously doing my homework preparing for this episode, and not only are you doing a lot of things beyond what I said in the intro here, but you just have a lot of wisdom and a lot of depth to really, to just vocalize what you've been through and what you've experienced. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some more of your wisdom in this episode. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule and joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all starts with wildland firefighting. And I did that for 14 years. And that was such a wild ride of cutting down trees on fire and jumping out of helicopters and driving big trucks on mountain roads. And just everything that goes along with that job is pretty unseen to the average person. But when you know what the wildland firefighters do, it's actually pretty insane, actually.
I can only imagine because being on this side of the coin and having the life I've had, which has been a little more urban and suburban, not so much in the woods or in the mountains, although I kind of live near the mountains now, but that's only pretty recent. But that's not really like my DNA. So I guess going through here, the first question that really popped into my mind was how did you develop the passion? Like, where does the passion to become a firefighter of any sort come from, in your opinion?
Yeah, so interesting is I'm actually third generation. So my grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother, before World War II, my grandfather was a fire lookout for the Forest Service on Mount Hood, and my grandma was a fire lookout on Mount Adams on the Washington side of the river. So they were kind of messaging each other like through signals and everything. And they ended up meeting down in Portland for some drinks, and that was the story. So, such an awesome story to have in your family. And then my father was also a wildland firefighter in California for many years. So, I guess I just grew up with the stories of all the adrenaline and crazy things that happen out there on the line and in the mountains. And I just got really attracted to it. And I think by like 15 or 16, I was just like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. And I'm so happy I did. I learned so many things, so many life lessons. And I did go through a lot of stuff. You're almost at war with nature in a way out there, but it's also such a spiritual kind of exciting thing to do with your life.
Yeah, so you were impacted by your heritage to become a firefighter, and that's really that's very interesting that you decided to keep that as a part of your lineage and continue that path. And so you talk about the adrenaline that the rush that you got from doing it, but there's also another side to it where you learned that it was also impacting you in a different way. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, gosh, since I was like, I guess I grew up skateboarding and snowboarding. And so I've always kind of been an adrenaline junkie, right? So the wildland fire was just another extreme sport. I'd spend the summers fighting fire and the winters in the backcountry skiing or traveling around the world or something in the winter. And so I guess I got kind of addicted to that adrenaline in a way. And And after 4, 5, 7 years in wildland fire, it was almost like that adrenaline got locked on full throttle, like always on. And so, the nature of the job is like 6 months. You work for 6 months like crazy, and then you're off for 6 months, which is a great lifestyle. But there's also that all of a sudden it's November and you're back home and there's no fire, there's no nothing. It's like from 100 miles an hour to zero. And um, I think it's really tough. That seasonality of the job is pretty hard on your mental health, actually.
So with you, do you think it was the off and on, the seasonality of it that really kind of got everything into your head? Like, I don't want to overstep any boundaries with the questions, but just curious to know, like, what exactly happened. You had this desire for the rush, but then something along the way happened.
Yeah, I would say it's so interesting because there's so many moments I can think of that were exciting and scary and terrifying but fun. And I think all those kind of added up. And also there was my engine captain passed away suddenly, and that was a moment for me that just destroyed me. That was really hard. And he passed away at the age of 40 from a heart attack, and it was just like life altering event for me. And it was traumatic, and also I would say it took about a year for my body to really start processing everything. And that's when like I really started to experience anxiety, experience weird symptoms, which really catapulted me into a pretty long healing journey, if you will.
So this is something that obviously, based on that occurrence, is what really prompted it. So, what for you kind of helped? Because there's so many things here. So, one thing that you talk about on your site, which is mountainmindtricks.com, and it's a plethora of wisdom and information, and obviously a reflection of your story. But you said here, and I'm probably going to paraphrase a little bit, that at some point you almost had to like teach your mind to think a little differently about things, which I think is a lot. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs that I think have that aha moment where they realize that they have the control over their thought processes. And it looks like that's something you've really learned. And I'm guessing that that's something that really helped you.
Yeah, absolutely. And through this healing journey, there's a lot of acupuncture and alternative healing, but one of my mentors turned me on to NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming. And I would say that was kind of, I already had this idea of we can choose our thoughts, and I used affirmations and I used meditation and things like that. And when I found NLP and really got into it and got trained in it at the master level, it changed everything because it really gave me the tools to heal my own mind and also really understand what's happening when we have thoughts that are repeating or feelings that come up out of nowhere, or really it's how to work with mental health in such a different alternative way. So I just feel so blessed that I found that modality and that it just resonated for me so well. And I guess that's why, the name sounds so weird, Mountain Mind Tricks, but I took that NLP and I took it back to wildland firefighting and took it to the field, and I really tested it. Like I wanted to test it on myself and go back in the fire environment and see. And it's really those mind tricks are so powerful. So I love it.
I actually think it's really brilliant branding for yourself. I think it really merges your two passions, at least the two things I feel like you're most passionate about together. And I think it really says a lot. So I actually think it's really cool branding.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, it took me a long time to think of that name, and it does, every time I hear it I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of like once you get such a brilliant name, like I didn't come up with the name for my podcast. somebody else, somebody I met on Twitter like 4 or 5 years ago. They were like, "Oh, did you ever consider calling your blog Mark My Words?" And I was like, "A matter of fact, I didn't. That's actually really brilliant, and I wish I would have thought of that." And I have kept that in my pocket up until I created this podcast. So that's even more impressive that you came up with all that on your own. I didn't. So
Oh man, I love it. I love your name too, the podcast. It's awesome.
yeah, everybody winds up saying that. At least everybody that knows of the podcast. I guess I shouldn't be that egotistic. Maybe some people don't like it, but everybody that I've talked to has really liked it. So I'm glad that I kept held on to it because it
Yeah.
feels like definitely feels like the right thing. So with all of that being said, so you went through all this really deep stuff and you came out of it in a much better place. And then along the way, so you're kind of unique from a lot of people I've had on this podcast because a lot of people it's kind of like a point A to point B where they're doing something, they transition to it and become an entrepreneur. And hopefully I'm not wrong. I know you said you've been a firefighter for 14 years. You're still doing it, correct?
I would say that is in question this summer, actually, because the business is going so well. It's like I'm not really sure I need to go back to fire. So, I have the ability to go out for a couple of weeks at a time instead of doing 6 months, which is really nice. So that may be what happens. But I'm not a full-time firefighter anymore because I'm just so passionate about this and just so happy to give to others.
Wow. Well, then I think I might stand corrected. You are much more like all the other guests than I actually realized. Because I
Yeah.
know studying up for this episode, I had the impression that you were still doing both. So that's really great that everything's taking off. And based on what you said, I suppose that's kind of your transition. Just things are going great.
Yeah, and that transition took, oh my gosh, at least 2 years of really taking baby steps, of getting the LLC, of writing a book. Like it took a lot of time for me to build to where I am now, and it's been a long journey to get there and to transition fully. And I think the hardest thing was actually like truly letting go of, I guess there's such a identity tied to job in our culture, but also in the firefighter, it's just so much deeper that it's like, who would I be without being a firefighter? That was probably the hardest part of the transition and really hard for me. So I'm happy to be through that and understand that process better now.
Interesting. So, what do you feel was kind of like the fork in the road moment in your journey and your transition as far as like, okay, I think I've hit the other side. I think this may actually become a full time job for me.
Yeah, so this summer I took a little bit of time off from the fires and I got my certification as a master practitioner in NLP and hypnosis and mental emotional release. And so after that training, I used all those tools on myself and I field tested it this summer in California on all these fires. And this fall when I came back home and really sat down and focused on the business, which I had some clients here and there, but this fall it really took off, and it was really a powerful moment for me that kind of everything was validated. My offer, my business, everything I'd been working for. Something I was getting on podcasts and people were buying my book, and it's just like it was definitely a turning point, I would say, this fall for sure.
So, what kind of people are you helping with all of the background that you now have obtained?
Yeah, so I do work a lot with wildland firefighters still in mental health specifically. I also work with entrepreneurs because there's so many correlations to, wildland firefighters, we focus on leadership. So I've been training in leadership for 14 years in the field, and seeing, wildland fire is so tricky because you can put in all this like fire line and have this big plan and everything's lined up and you have all the resources you need, and the fire burns up and burns it all over your line, and now you're back to square one. And it's like, that's exactly like entrepreneurship. So it resonates so much, the leadership, the mindset, and definitely like the peak performance you need in wildland fire and entrepreneurship. So, I've blended those two. So those are the two audiences I work with.
So, in order to reach entrepreneurs, did they come to you or did you go to them, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting because it started with a lot of firefighters that were transitioning like I was. Like, oh, I want to be a fitness trainer. I want to start my own business. I want to start my own tree company. I want to start my own construction company. So it started like that. And I started to realize, you know what, there's already entrepreneurs out there that need this too. So um it's really just me reaching out and finding them so far, and I imagine they're going to be attracted to me because of the leadership skills that I've not only have, but I've field tested in a real environment.
So, do you find that a lot of the people you've worked with in your firefighter community have kind of, I guess, been, I guess, aspiring for something else? Or is it just something that's organically happening? I guess in your case, I definitely feel like it was a very organic occurrence.
Yeah, I feel like most of the folks that I work with in the fire world they're stuck in their career. They've been in the same position for the last, 10 years, or they're really unhappy because their relationships are broken and they're on their third divorce, or they have some serious trauma going on. And um, there's so much, I guess, mental strain and chronic fatigue and all the things that go into wildland fire with the poor nutrition and how beat up our bodies get. There's just so many things. And so they're struggling with that. Just being a wildland firefighter for long term is pretty hardcore on your mind and your body. So usually though they're stuck somewhere. They're stuck in their career and relationships, and finances is usually where I focus.
Interesting, because as you're talking, not that what I do is certainly, fighting fires. I mean, I guess you could say I put out fires, so to speak, quote unquote, because I won't say where I work. I don't think I'm supposed to say where I work, so I definitely won't. But I basically work in like the broadcast media industry, and I deal with live broadcast media. So lots of different things going on, like lots of different entities all at the same time. I guess I'll just say channels that I'm dealing with. And, we'll lose connections and things like that. And a lot of calls all at the same time. Sometimes there will be several outages all at the same time. And yeah, it's like, metaphorically putting out fires. And I just
Yeah.
kind of relate that to you. Certainly not. I want to emphasize it is not, and I repeat, not the same thing, because what you're doing is way more hardcore than what I'm doing. But
Yeah.
but as I'm listening to you talk, I'm kind of relating some of this because I feel like with all that stress that people like me in my field have to deal with, especially that part of it where it's like live, lots of eyeballs are watching, and it can become very stressful, and it can get to a point where you're just like, okay, I wonder if there's something else that another passion that I could get into. So, based on just listening to you, it feels like, just the nutrition part of it. Because again, I'm not out there, certainly not fighting fires or anything like that, but it's kind of like the opposite where you're sitting stationary for hours and hours, and that wears on your health in a different kind of way. And I feel like even though we're two very different paths and walks of life, I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania and you're at the very least from Montana. And I don't know if you're actually from Montana, but yeah, it's just amazing parallels, even though we're from quote unquote different worlds. And that's it just goes to show how much we're alike, even though we're so different.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I love it. The similarity to totally different worlds, and that's what's so interesting about the wildland fire and entrepreneur stuff is just like it just translates, like you're saying. It's so interesting, and yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, as soon as I heard you telling the stories, which is exactly one of the things I wanted to learn about you, because it's not every day that you meet a wildland firefighter, and I just think it's so fascinating, just the way you got into it and got interested. I mean, I am not, I guess one of the differences between you and I as well is that you spoke of being like an adrenaline junkie. And I know that what I'm doing could possibly be something you would be like, yeah, I could be wrong, but a little bit of like an adrenaline rush. Like it's almost a little bit of a rush, but I am not an adrenaline junkie by any means. I mean,
Right.
I've never been out snowboarding, and if I see any fire at all, I make sure I go the other way immediately. So I'm definitely not pursuing adrenaline at all. So that's just really interesting, the parallels.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, the adrenaline is, I think it comes down to like flow state, and really I was chasing that state of mind, and on my snowboard or skateboard, and eventually went to fire to chase that state of mind. And it's so similar to surfing or snowboarding or any of those sports where you're outside, you're connected to nature, but you're also just kind of letting go of your mind and your body. So you're just kind of in that moment. And that's when everything goes crazy on a wildland fire, and it's like you're in the moment. It's kind of like now or never, or this one operation's like either going to save it or you're going to lose it. It's that moment that you kind of get into that state that you can't really explain with words. It's almost like extra sensory type feelings come up, like your gut instincts, your intuition, or you just tap into so much more in that moment. It's pretty amazing.
So you mentioned that through the process of transitioning into entrepreneurship, you had a moment somewhere along the line where you found like a lot of inner peace. Now, everything you're telling me kind of speaks to like the kind of in the moment focus that you need for all these things like surfing, snowboarding, just all this adrenaline stuff. And I'm curious to know, do you think that that mindset, even though it's so different from finding inner peace, do you think that that helped you to really find your way and your calm and your peace?
Yeah, what's so interesting is like I think getting into that state was, I chased it and I loved it, but it's also what I learned to listen to my gut instinct, in so many life or death situations of like, I'd walk up to a tree with my chainsaw, the tree's on fire, and I'm looking it up. I'm like, okay, do I want to cut this tree or do I not? And I would sit there and just listen to my gut instinct and be like, yes or no. And I'd be like, and I would get an answer. I'm like, okay, well, that's what I'm going with. And I learned to really trust that. Um, and I think that has translated so much to now where, if I make a decision in business or finance or whatever it is in marketing or whatever, it's like I can go into that state and say, okay, do I want to do this? Yes or no? and I get an answer. And that's it's so powerful to be able to trust yourself like that, even though it's like, well, I don't really know what's going to come out of this, but I trust that it's the right answer. And that's really important for entrepreneurs, isn't it?
I would say so. I mean, not that I'm a full-fledged entrepreneur at this point, but I know I personally, even though I've gotten better at trusting my intuition as my life has progressed, I'm one to kind of like kick back and think things over a little bit. And it sounds to me like that is not in your DNA, correct?
Yeah, it took some time to like really wrestle with that. Yeah, most people are like, well, I need to make a list and a pros or cons or this and that. And it's like, I've learned to do this so well in the fire environment. I've just took it into my personal life. And now it's like, I make decisions really fast, and people that I work with are like, man, you just move so fast on things. It's like, yeah, because I know for a fact this is what I'm supposed to do right now. And it's, it's of course I've made mistakes doing that, of course, but it's I do trust it more than my rational mind sometimes, which is interesting.
Do you ever have any like real quick decisions you've made where you've wound up regretting it, or is it just no regrets? This is how you feel?
Let's see. Gosh, really quick decisions that I regretted. You know, I can't really like think of anything specific right now that like I have a big regret over it because it's um I guess in fire it's so much like when you make a decision it's like everything's changing constantly so much that if you make a decision that's not the best decision, at least you made one on the information you had at the moment. You tried your best. So I feel like I've always been doing that, like trying my best with what I have.
So, speaking of decisions, I'm looking at some of my notes here because, again, your site is just everything's so well worded. It's no surprise to me that you're a two-time author because you write like really, really well. Um, so, you talked about at one point, and I just plucked out things that I thought were really interesting. You said something about talking about whispers of a good life because you made good money. And you certainly don't have to talk about what that good money means. But from what I got from that was that you might have kind of had a little bit of a internal struggle with that, or I could be wrong. Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that speaks to a broader problem of the wildland firefighters don't get paid what they deserve at all. So it's you're risking your life for like $15 an hour, $18 an hour. So I worked really hard to get to a better wage than that, like 10 years, 12 years to get to that. So I always struggled with money in that way. And also I think it's so interesting because I would say year 6 or 7 out of 14, I started getting like, "Are you sure you really wanna be doing this? Like, is this really the path that you wanna do?" And I just always had this idea, like, what ki like, I for so many years, I guess there was this I could never do anything but fire. Like, that's I believed that. I believed that for a long time, and it took a lot of events and a lot of healing to understand that that was just myself limiting myself, and that journey of understanding, I can be more than a firefighter. That was really big for me when that came through.
Wow, that's really mind blowing because I can't think of too many things that are more courageous and worthy of tremendous amounts of respect and like $1 million an hour pay than what you're doing. I mean, it's just I know I for one never other than seeing Smokey the Bear on TV, I never once thought about doing anything that you've done. And I know that you developed that passion through your just through your family history, but was there ever anything else that you were like, boy, maybe I'll become like a, I don't know, financial analyst or, whatever the case. Did you ever have any thought of doing anything else, or was this truly just it?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I remember in high school there was a moment of I was looking at like colleges and looking at this and that, and I was pretty determined to go to acupuncture school.
Oh,
And
wow.
I remember like I want to be an acupuncturist. I love Chinese medicine. I still love Chinese medicine to this day. I don't remember exactly how it all rolled out, but I remember there was like this moment of I can't really afford that. I'm just gonna go fight fire. And I think that was like back to that same question you asked before of like this thing about money, right? Is like being successful is like it just didn't seem in my reach, and so I always wanted to be an acupuncturist, a healer, and I forgot about it until I went through this healing journey and I worked with this acupuncturist and was like, oh, this is what I was actually supposed to be doing, was helping other people and healing them and working with them. And so now I would say I do the same thing. I just use words instead of needles.
And it's interesting because you all throughout your just listening to all your passions, it's always about helping other people, but there's like an extreme to it because you got the adrenaline. Obviously, something like snowboarding only helps you, I guess, but just being a firefighter, helping other people, acupuncture is helping other people, the offering, the podcast, all these other things that you're doing are helping other people. But there's like such a calm and there's such a rush. I don't know if you've ever really thought about that much or know where that extreme might have come from.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think it took me a long time to see firefighting as helping other people, because sometimes it's like, oh, we're just out here in the middle of the wilderness cutting down trees or this and that, but really we do spend a lot of time burning out around houses or cleaning up their yards before the fire comes. Like we do help people so much. It's such a selfless job. So I'm glad to have that perspective now. And I think, thinking about the extremes of how I love to be so calm and I love meditation and I love becoming centered. I also loved that adrenaline rush, and I think because it brought me back to that calm state. I think it all comes back to that of going back into that flow state that I found in skateboarding, snowboarding, and firefighting. It really comes down to flow state in that moment of really like total body joy. Um, but I think there is like in the firefighting, I was chasing that feeling. Like I wasn't really acquiring it so much because there was so many other negative emotions. Like I feel like I was really angry throughout my fire career, and I used that to hike faster. I used that to cut trees better. I used that so many different ways. So it was interesting when I learned to release my anger. It's like, oh, what do I do now? How do I even fight fire without the anger? Like that's a whole different aspect. So it's really interesting.
What do you think you were angry about?
Oh, well, my parents went through a crazy divorce growing up when I was about 10, and it was just like so much anger. We can dive way deeper into that if you want to. But really that event was pretty traumatic for me. Pretty like, there was police and jail time and all that sorts of weird stuff. So there was trauma there, and it's just anger at my dad, anger for leaving me, anger. I've really turned into a crazy, angry teenager. And that's, I think, when I started chasing that calm feeling of like, okay, I've gotten to skateboarding and gotten to snowboarding and all that kind of stuff. So, there was a lot of heavy anger for a lot of years through all that.
Interesting. So that really kind of came to a head while you were out there just releasing all that through all of your firefighting and other extreme endeavors.
Right. And it was like I could just beat the crap out of the ground with my axe. I could do all the things in the world. I could just be screaming out there cutting trees. Like I would just release it, but it would never go away. It was like endless anger. And until I found the NLP stuff and the acupuncture, that's when I really learned to like process and honor those emotions. And I would say that was a big turning point for me, like personally, and like in my mental health and my physical health, was like learning to really honor and process the anger and not just um throwing it out in the world, I guess.
So, did you find acupuncture before you got into your wildlife five? I can't even talk. Your firefighting career, or was it like during or as you were picking it up?
I would say the last like 2 years of my fire career, I started going to acupuncture. So I knew about it. I always wanted to try it. And when I finally went, it was just like the best experience of my entire life. And it's still one of my favorite things in the world. I just love it so much.
So, was acupuncture, you said that you thought about that in an earlier phase of your life, if I'm understanding right? So
Yeah,
did you just kind of have that in the back of your mind for all those years?
I think I totally forgot about it. Like I knew about it. I would see it once in a while, but it never really registered until I guess like I had some severe anxiety, and the health problems I was talking about earlier was just like really hard, really hardcore stuff going on. So I turned to acupuncture.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about how I got into creating this podcast and doing this blog, or doing a blog that I haven't written in a long time. I'm probably going to wind up closing. That's another story. But I feel like there was a dream for me to become a writer and speaker when I was younger. And then I too just kind of, I don't know if I completely forgot about it, but I definitely stored it away in the back of my mind. And I think as I got into the corporate world, I was like, well, I gotta climb the ladder. I gotta work towards promotions. I gotta work towards all these goals. And I kind of just got away from what was more personal to me. And it sounds like that was not really the case for you. It sounds like what was personal to you was what you were brought up with, and you just carried it on. I guess the legacy you carried on.
I think that's so interesting because I would agree that it was, or I think it's so similar because I feel like I just kind of got lost in somebody else's dream for a long time, and to my family's dream of firefighting and all that stuff. So I think it's just like you, of the corporate world, instead of writing and doing the things you really want to do. For me, it was firefighting instead of being a healer and really stepping into, my own light and really being who I wanted to be. Um, and I always felt out of place in firefighting. Like, I'm really spiritual. I'm into like quantum physics and all the crazy spirituality stuff, right? So meditation, all those things. And it's just like that's just odd for a firefighter, right? That's just totally different. And so I always felt a little, odd man out, if you will, or things like that. So it's just interesting of um yeah, it took me a long time to realize like, yeah, you don't really fit in this. Like it took a long time to even realize that, right?
That's really interesting. I mean, you're talking to somebody who felt that way through a lot of phases of their life. Like, I just always felt a little out of place. I actually feel like, at least socially and within the media culture I'm in, my current job, I almost feel like this is the best I've fit in anywhere in a really long time. And it's interesting that you kind of like felt that way along your journey. And I could almost kind of see that because just from talking to you and just seeing you and everything else, you definitely seem more like you would be like a scientist or something like that. I would never have guessed firefighter.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's really funny. I like that. And um gosh, yeah, it's oh, there goes snow off my roof.
How much
um
snow have you guys gotten out there?
we got 80 inches last week. And
Whoa, wait, 80
yeah,
inches last week?
yeah, there's about 6 feet in the front yard here. So
Holy
yeah,
smokes.
yeah. I'm actually in Jackson Hole, Wyoming right now. So yeah. Anyway, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Oh, I'm sorry I did that.
No, it's the
Usually,
snow.
yeah, usually there comes a point where I lose my train of thought, which is fine. I can handle that. But no, please, have, first of all, have you found it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Have
Have
you
I found?
found your train of thought?
No, it's
No.
gone.
Well, I have a thought, and I'm sorry you lost your train of thought. I'm still trying to process the 80 inches that you're getting out there. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to get a storm tonight that might bring half a foot. I mean, big deal.
Right, right.
But I'm just thinking a little bit about, you talked a lot about family and kind of almost feeling like this was the passion and the path that you needed to take. And I know that for me, I had a lot of different dreams, and I think the the actual career that I wound up taking, which is broadcast media, was something that I always had a passion for. I would take apart black and white TVs and look at them and try to play with them and do all kinds of things with them growing up. And always had like a fascination for radio and television, and how do they get these people, like where do they come from and what are they like and how do they get there. And I actually think part of that, I'm just realizing that I think I've had that passion all through my life. I think this is actually one of the reasons for this podcast is just I have a passion for just knowing what people are like. And that goes all the way back to discovering, sitcoms and watching MTV as a kid. But I digress. I'll get back on track with my point. My point is I was really kind of like discouraged from following the paths that I wanted to take. And it actually got to a point where one of my parents were like, well, why don't you just get an effing business degree? And, you're talking to somebody who is absolutely terrible with numbers and math. And I somehow found a way to get through it all, but I do not belong with, like, I don't know, Goldman Sachs or anything like that. Like, I shouldn't be doing like that kind of business or anything with numbers. I'm probably a little better than I give myself credit for, but I shouldn't be pursuing like a business degree where I could juggle numbers or a career in that way. And it was frustrating for me because I wanted to go to a particular college. I had a couple different ideas where they had good programs for what I wanted to do. And I almost had to like drop out of school and show that, hey, I'm not passionate about what I'm doing. I need to be doing what I'm actually passionate about. Like, I know what I want to do. So I don't know if you ever had any moments like that or if it was just mostly internal for you.
I would say I was so passionate about my wildland fire career. It's like all I could think about. It's all I cared about for so many years. And it took, unfortunately, my captain passing away to like wake me up to like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not sure if this is exactly what I want to do. What's really interesting is I would say one of the dreams I have that I'm working toward is like to go to college. And like as weird as that sounds, it's like that's something I've wanted for so long. And it goes back to that moment, like I was talking about with the acupuncture school in high school of like, oh, I don't have the money for that. And it's like well, you know what, I have the money now. Like I would like to go to college and look at like a psychology degree or something like that. And so it's so interesting how, do I need a college degree to be an entrepreneur? Like, no way. But it's something that is so calling to me that's like just for my own personal satisfaction, I guess. Because, I guess in these days, college degrees don't mean a lot anymore in some ways. And I'm excited to go to college. I'm excited to, um, I don't know, learn more.
So is that something you're actually going to follow through on? Are you working on enrolling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I haven't registered yet, and I'm not exactly sure on which term I'm gonna do, if it's gonna be the summer or fall, but yeah, I'm really excited. At least like take a couple classes and make sure it's what I want to do before I like really dive in. And it's gonna have to be that, of course, life work balance of school and work and all that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's awesome. I mean, it's never too late to go back. I know I have also toyed with the idea of going back just to become, I guess, more of a educator in my field, and that's something that I have mostly thought about, but haven't really followed through on a lot because, frankly, there aren't enough hours in the day, which I think you can speak to very well. Um, but yeah, that's amazing that you're even thinking about doing that after everything you've done. You've built up a business. I mean, you don't necessarily have to do that, but I could totally see you doing that. And I'd be curious to know if along the way you would kind of wish that you had more time to fit that in. I'm guessing probably yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just this pattern. I'd say my first 5 or 6 years of fire of like, oh, I'll go to school next year. I'll take a short season to go to school next year. And so it's just like, it's just been something I wanted to do for so long that I'm like, I'm really excited about that. Like, I just want to do it and enjoy it and have some satisfaction out of it. Yeah.
So is your goal to get like an actual bachelor's? Or are you gonna try to actually declare a major?
Yes, I'm going for a business degree with a minor in like pre-counseling, so like psychology, and with the idea of potentially getting a master's for therapy and things like that. Because sometimes me and therapists don't really agree on things in some ways because I'm alternative. It's like, asking a medical doctor about chiropractors, it doesn't really match up sometimes. And so I do want to learn more about their side of things and really dive deep into the science of therapy where, what I do is I get the results where therapy sometimes doesn't. And which is really, I guess, similar to the medical field in that way too, right?
Right. Um, I want to actually segue kind of into what you're doing because I look at your site and I know that you actually talked about or previously talked about your NLP and hypnosis, and you're actually the second person I've had on this year who has talked about hypnosis. And I, for one, have kind of a animated, cartoony sitcom type of perspective on what hypnosis is, where they dangle something in front of your face and suddenly you're a different person. I learned in a previous podcast, and I mean I kind of know that realistically already, but I know just from the last person I talked about that it doesn't work that way at all. And I'd be curious to just get a little bit of a insight on what all of that means to you and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a master practitioner in NLP and hypnosis and mental emotional release, which is a really specific technique, and I do want to talk about that, but specifically on the hypnosis. Yeah, you're right. There's this stigma. There's this idea of the stage hypnotist that's making the people like cluck like chickens and all that crazy stuff that we see on TV, right? Like that's
Yeah.
exactly what people think. So you're right. Um, and what hypnosis really is, it's like that moment when you're driving in your car, you're going down the highway, you're listening to that awesome song, the sun is just right, and you're just kind of like fade out or you're kind of like zoned out, right? That's hypnosis. That's where the hypnotist is taking you, is to that state to where basically your rational thinking mind kind of falls away and it's just you into that relaxed state. And what's really interesting is that's where we can do so much work, for what we believe about ourselves, what we think about ourselves, what feelings we're releasing, negative emotions, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of therapeutic value, and really it's all about letting ourselves believe what we want to believe and changing our beliefs in hypnosis. And it's so powerful. There's so many testimonials, there's so much science behind it. It's really, you can go on for days about that. And all I can say is that hypnosis is one of my favorite things because I look at it as like clinical shamanism. It's very like a Western world avenue to go into shamanic changes or shamanic healing, because we really are like just changing a symbol in somebody's like kind of vision or somebody's idea of something, just changing like um say a book on a bookshelf, changing that into something completely different actually changes the way they feel and think. So when we go into somebody's hypnosis world and we start changing things, it really does help them in such dramatic ways. So it's weird, it's different, but it works.
You said something really interesting. I never thought about music as a form of like hypnosis. That has never occurred to me. And if that's the case, I am like beyond hypnotized by many, many people out there. So
Yeah.
that's really an interesting parallel on that front. And one thing a little more seriously, um, how do you feel this part of your background helps and coincides with your work as a fitness trainer, athletic nutritionist, a coach? How does it help you?
Oh, it's so interesting because I guess in mental health, there's like classically, it's all about medications and talking about your problems. And there's definitely some merit to all that stuff. But to me, the first step in any sort of mental health or physical health, but really mental health, is nutrition. We really got to get your nutrition on track and get the supplements right, because there's a major scientific evidence to like B6 deficiencies, vitamin D deficiencies are connected to anxiety and depression. It's almost they're parallel. You'll see deficiencies and then the symptoms. Um, so there's the nutrition piece that really helps me, and it helps me to understand how the food really affects our mind and our body. And then the fitness training is something I picked up just from, in wildland firefighting. We are, I would say, like super athletes. We're on par with Olympic athletes in a lot of ways. So we train super hard and we train uh, like professional athletes all the time. And so that was something I picked up. And what's interesting is I find myself using it with a lot of clients. Of we go through, a breakthrough session, which is like the mental emotional release and hypnosis and NLP. And afterwards, a lot of people have, maybe they want to lose weight, or maybe they want to be healthier, maybe they're working on a medical condition or something like that. And I'm not a doctor, but I can definitely help them find those daily habits of exercise, of nutrition, of things that are going to really not just change their mind but change their body. So it's kind of a full spectrum way of looking at mental health.
And it's interesting you talked about shaman and shamanistic. Do you consider yourself a shaman of sorts?
That's funny. Maybe someday, I am being mentored by a shaman in the Lakota Lakota teachings. So I've gone through the sweat lodge and some other ceremonies and things like that. So I'm slowly learning some shamanism, and I would say there is some energy work that goes into what I do as well. Um, so I wouldn't say I'm not a shaman yet, but I'm learning.
That's amazing. Yeah, I asked that question not really knowing how you would respond. I didn't know if that would be like a silly question or if that was actually a legitimate thought on my part.
No, I appreciate it. I love that question. Thank you.
So, with all of this being covered, I guess one thing that I haven't really talked about much are your books. You have Awakened by Heartfire, and I didn't actually say the entire title on here. And you have another one, Overcome Anxiety Like a Hero. Did you want to talk about your books a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, Overcoming Anxiety Like a Hero was the first book I wrote, and it really is kind of it was a little bit of a healing journey for me just to write it, but it's also kind of what I learned about anxiety, going through severe anxiety, and actually, um, I would say I don't have anxiety anymore. It's completely gone. And so what I learned through all that process of, nutrition, of how we think, of like all those tools and tips that I picked up along the way is in that book. And it's really formatted into your own hero's journey. So it kind of takes you through that process of going through that classic hero's journey. Um, and Awakened by Heartfire was the second book I wrote, and that one is very deep and spiritual, and it really goes in depth into a lot of my healing journey. So there's a little bit of story in there about me. I would say it's kind of broken up into stories and then techniques and kind of self-help things. And what it does is it really looks at the wildland fire environment more in a spiritual sense and what was really going on, and like working with the consciousness of fire, with all sorts of stuff that's going on in nature. Definitely more of a shamanistic way of looking at fire, and a lot of the lessons I took from being a firefighter spiritually. And so that book has a whole meditation series that goes along with it that really guides the reader into some of the tools I learned, like protection meditations and grounding, and learning how to open up our heart center and things like that. So it's the subtitle is actually Wildland Fire Stories and the Secrets to the Universe. So it's very spiritual. If you don't like quantum mechanics or new age stuff, then you probably don't want to read it, but if you're into that, you're going to love it.
I myself would think that anybody would probably be interested in hearing what you have to say. And maybe that I'm saying that and I'm biased because I had you on this show and I'm like really fascinated just from your thought processes and how you've taken what you've learned along the way and just and the way you process everything is just so cool and in some ways very similar to me, but in other ways like completely different. And I just think it while it's different, it's like really good. I feel like people could really learn something from you and really pick up some value from either your services or just probably by picking up your books, which I personally definitely want to at some point pick up one of these and read them because you are like very inspiring and fascinating and yeah, just amazing to hear you talk about just mind control, spirituality, like really awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think I do have my own podcast, the Sacred Ancestry podcast, and I'm always talking about these things. So if there's anybody interested in these ideas, make sure to check out the show for sure.
Yeah, also that's something I feel like I don't have enough hours in the day. I know I checked out one episode that you were on of somebody else's, I believe. Let's see. Oh, yeah, so I didn't want to really get into this, but episode 58, unless you want to talk about it, your near death experience that changed
Oh,
your life.
yeah. So, back to, my parents getting divorced. I was like a really crazy teenager going through a lot of anger. I was in anger management. You got really bad. I turned to drugs. I turned to really hardcore, like cutting myself. Like I really went through a lot as a teenager. Um, to where I did have an overdose experience on pills and alcohol, and it wasn't a classic like light through the tunnel type thing. It was just when I went to the other side, that in that experience, it was just blackness. There was nothing. There was nothing even to feel. And I think I was so lost in life at that time. I didn't really have connection to anything else. So I definitely don't think that's the afterlife by any means for me. It's just it was a wake up call. And what ended up happening after that, for so long I wasn't too sure, was that a real near death experience? I don't know. Um, but what happened after that is that the next day I quit all the drugs. I started reading 2 or 3 books a week that weren't even in school. I started meditating. I started going to kung fu class and yoga classes and tai chi and all this stuff. So I literally had a 180 in life the day after that. So that's what's convinced me that something really, really powerful happened to me that night. And thank God, because I was really on a really bad path. So I'm grateful for it. I learned so much.
And I feel like we could go down such a rabbit hole with this topic. And I know I listened to quite a bit of this episode. I didn't know if that was something you'd want to talk about. So I appreciate you opening up a little bit on that. And I highly recommend anybody listening or watching to find that on Thomas's website. It's really fascinating. And I will say, you're the second person I've talked to in recent years that has had like a near death experience who said the same kind of thing where it was like there was just nothing during your experience. And excuse me, hearing that is like, oh man, like that's enough of a wake up call even for me. So that's just
Right.
really because again, we could go through a rabbit hole, and I know we're trying to wrap up, but I have my like vision of what the afterlife and reincarnation and all that would look like or what it would be, and that's like the one avenue nobody wants to take. That well, maybe is that really it? Like, so
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
It yeah. What's so interesting is I started reading a lot about it. I heard something on a podcast, like a researcher that was actually doing studies about this, and she was saying that around, like 10 to 15% of people report that like nothingness, and the rest of like, there's a couple different experiences that are really common, like the ancestor, like family coming, the white tunnel of light, all those things. And it's, to me, after all the weird spiritual things I've had happen to me in life, I really think we have a choice. That's my 2 cents on it, is that we have a choice.
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about going to the light. I think about how weird it would be for me, somebody who's lived through the late 20th century, early 21st century, to meet up with somebody who lived in, like, I don't know, the 19th century, the early part of the 20th century, even though they could be family or somebody else connected. Like, what would that be like? That's again, I could go down a real rabbit hole with this, but
Oh yeah.
I I just wanted to encourage people to check that out. I thought that was a really interesting part of your story, and really just want to give you a chance to talk about how, if anybody wants to work with you or contact you, obviously you have mountainmindtricks.com that they can find a lot on you. But do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, so there's mountainmindtricks.com, and that's the major place to find everything. I also have integrativeentrepreneurship.com if you're an entrepreneur. Um, Sacred Ancestry Podcast, and you can find me on Facebook at Thomas M. Wurm and Instagram at Mountain Mind Tricks. So that's all the places you can find me. My books are on Amazon, the podcast is on everything, all the other apps, Apple, Spotify, all that. So yeah, check it out. And what I can say about, what I do is the breakthrough sessions are pretty life transforming. And if you're stuck somewhere in life, please reach out because I can help you. So
I have no doubt about that. And again, this was really fascinating and just again insight on what it's like to be a firefighter and to do something just so courageous like that. I mean, it's just really amazing to me, and it's something that I I know somebody like me would never do. So you have like my respect and then some for
I appreciate that.
everything you've done. So I thank you for taking some time out and being on Mark My Words. And I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but if not, then that might be it for our time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And something I want to say is I think, whatever you think you are, you're just so much more than that. And I just appreciate everybody listening and listening to the story. And I hope I provided some inspiration or value for you. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And believe me, what you said just now, it took me a long time to learn that. And I think I'm just starting to like live that now because I've been through so much in my life where I didn't really know where my value was or if I had value at all. And I've come to learn that there is a lot more value in all of us than we probably realize. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But I just wanted to kind of put my 2 cents into that thought because I hope people take that to heart. That's something that it took me way too long to learn. So, with that being said, that's it for this episode. Thank you to Thomas Worm for being on the show. And we'll be back soon with a new episode. Thanks for listening, everybody.